Welcome to Catalyst, a program about people, ideas, issues, and conversations around them.
Welcome to Catalyst. I'm Doug Webster, host of the STEM Education Series, A Renewed Culture of Innovation. STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. This series was developed to discuss key issues around stimulating interest in technology, creativity, and innovation, and to help strengthen science, engineering, and technology education capacity. Today's episode is The New Degree, Setting a Course to Prosperity. My guest is Dave Wilcox. Dave is president of the Global Skills Exchange in Alexandria, Virginia, and specializes in development of workforce education and training, skill standards and assessment, and the optimization of workforce development systems. Dave was deputy director of the National Skills Standards Board. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Hello, Doug.
Good to see you. We're going to jump right in here. What is a breakdown in terms of cost and benefit of a college degree?
Well, I think as a recent study shows at the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce, that a college degree is a highly textured area. It depends on the degree. It depends on the source of that degree. So you cannot make a blanket statement about that question. In fact, just some data here looking at a degree, let's say in education or healthcare today, has a very, very low evidence of unemployment for recent graduates. But you go into architecture or other areas, you have quite different outcomes and quite different statistics. Now, part of that's driven by the current state of the economy, but in general, there does seem to be some definite value of the degree.
Okay, are there other ways to get a meaningful credential?
I think one of the most interesting things that I'm observing, just as we are certainly indicating in this country that getting a degree is the pathway to prosperity, is the very time that we're starting to see a bit of a challenge to the traditional degree as either sufficient or the only pathway to that success. I mean, I've seen that evidence coming from the business world, who is saying to some degree they're losing confidence in the degree as a differentiator of the knowledge and skills and capability of applicants to their business. We're seeing the economists are now saying, not all economists, but some economists are saying, is it really economically viable? For example, if I come out of high school, get which is tough these days, getting a decent job, or I come out of a liberal arts degree 4 years later with $100,000 worth of debt or something like that. It may take 15, 20, 30 years for that to actually start to normalize in terms of net value. So, and with the proliferation of people going into degree programs has also led to some uncertainty about the variability of quality of those degrees. So I think looking at alternative methodologies, this is the time I think this is becoming a significant issue in this country.
Now, you were a deputy director of the National Skills Standards Board. Can you tell us about skill standards?
Yes. Now, this was a reaction. The legislation that established the National Skills Standards Board was a reaction to a very important report that was written in the 80s about us being a nation at risk, that we were not creating the workforce that would be essential to be competitive on the world stage. So there was legislation, the Skills Standards Act of 1994, which put in place an organization to start to address, could there be a way of creating some national information around knowledge and skill requirements and ways of credentialing those requirements that could provide that sector of the workforce portable credentialing that would work. So the skills standard actually is from a very technical standpoint, it's just a clear statement of what work is being done in the various sectors and what are the knowledge and skills that are essential to be able to perform that work at a proficient level.
Now, what about the NSSB? What happened to it?
Actually, the additional legislation had a sunset of 5 years, which would have made it 1999.
Oh, okay.
The Congress did decide to continue to fund it for several additional years and actually sunset in 2003. Two just real quick perspectives. One is I thought the technical work that was done in terms of finding ways of defining, capturing, validating this kind of information took a step forward, I believe, with the work of the National Skills Standards Board. What became a challenge a bit was how does that information then impact or influence the nature and character of how our institutions are functioning and working, which became more of an organizational question nationally than it did become a technical question.
Yeah.
I don't think that question was fully answered.
Okay. Now, as president of GSX, Global Skills Exchange, how does your organization help fulfill the NSSB mission?
Well, we actually were founded in 2003, just upon the sunset of the National Skills Standards Board, and our intent was to carry out, at a much smaller scale certainly, that intention of the National Skills Standards Board, and still are doing that. One of our major efforts has been in the application and leveraging of that work and the mechanics of that work, I mean the technology of that work across the federal sector. We have a number of broad projects to build skill standards and to build credentialing systems based on that.
Now, how does the U.S. compare with other nations in terms of credentials and credentialing?
That was a key question that the board attempted to answer. Most industrialized countries have a greater government involvement in the defining of either competency systems or credentialing systems or for example, the Commonwealth countries have something called the National Qualification System, which was an attempt to organize learning and map it up against the work requirements of the major sectors. The Central European and others became more apprenticeship-oriented and really started to get students involved in learning a trade or a career much, much earlier in their cycle. The board said we have to make this work in a country in which education and training is a very decentralized, distributed kind of structure. You can't go in and impose something, is that it has to be organically grown to some degree.
Yeah.
And so I would say in most cases we don't have a national model. Whether that be the right or wrong thing to do is really a policy question. But certainly was the key question the board was asked to answer.
Okay. Hey, in a recent report, Pathways to Prosperity, it was led by Bill Simons of Harvard. He said we need to strengthen and expand non-4-year degree options. Can you elaborate on that? What was meant by that?
Right. I mean, as I was reading that report, which I thought was a very comprehensive and thoughtful report, it kind of reinforced the point I made in my opening statement, is that we've gotten on this degree focus. It's created a social driver. It's created oftentimes failures to be successful in that pathway, because oftentimes many students, that more academic model isn't where their key capability resides. And so why are we separating out this kind of academic pathway from the larger pathway of learning and leveraging personal abilities and skills? So I think his point, let's not get on this degree-only track, as important as degrees are. Let's look at a broader approach that involves many other types of ways at which persons can learn, and which persons can be credentialed so that they have success in their life.
Okay, great. Now, MIT recently announced they're offering online certificate programs. Connecticut Next Generation Manufacturing has expanded their one-year certificates. Can you tell us more about what this means in terms of individual student goals and pathways?
Yeah, let me get my thoughts around that question, because I think it's a very, very important one. What appears to be occurring partly because of technology and the low cost of distributing knowledge and distributing learning to almost everyone in the country at almost very, very low distribution cost, is making certificate programs, other types of non-traditional learning tools and vehicles available. And it's also, I think, raising the value of the certificate model. I have some thoughts about that, but the certificate model being that I have taken some unit of instruction, and because I have taken that unit of instruction and I, in many cases, pass some sort of an assessment that I have learned the important content from that, that I'm recognized with some sort of a certificate or credential.
Okay, great. Can you compare and contrast an industry certification with a college certificate?
Yes. An industry certification, kind of by definition, is something that is derived and created within the industry as a whole, validated within the workforce of that industry, and has recognizability and portability across the industry. But it has that authority because of the empirical methods that are used to develop that certification program. A college certificate can be created in many kinds of different ways. A professor could choose to build a certificate program. The college, as a larger body in the college, could create a certificate program. And it may be very effective and very well done. The question can be, how is that recognized in other parts of the industry? For example, if I have a certificate from a college in New York, does that resonate with an employer in Texas, for example? Because there's no standard across the industry for the content or the outcomes of that kind of program.
Now, compare those to college degrees, to associate degrees, bachelor degrees. What are the gaps? Or are there, I assume there are gaps, but.
Yeah, I mean, they are quite, if you look at an associate degree or a bachelor's degree, they often are broader, certainly. Industry-based certifications, and most certificate programs are very narrowly defined around a very specific skill set or a very specific occupational category. So in that sense, that they don't, they're not the same. However, one thing that is emerging, I believe, is looking at a package of credentials, such as certifications and certificates that are organized and assembled in such a way that give you assurance of some kind of learning has occurred and some skill is attained by that person.
Now, since this show is about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what can be said about certificates or certifications in STEM areas? Or degrees and
Right. I mean, I think that the sciences that are more well-defined bodies of knowledge in many cases are prone for the development of certificates and certifications for the application of that knowledge in many cases. The question, I think, becomes, if we focus on STEM, since I'm an engineer, I think, and you're an engineer,
Right.
we believe in the importance of science and engineering and math, and it's going to be very critical to all careers, not just science and engineering careers, as we moved into the 21st century. Most persons in whatever job they hold will need to have a stronger or greater depth in the math, sciences, engineering disciplines, because it's going to be part of our world and part of our work, no matter what your job title is. So I believe in that being broadly integrated into programs, whatever occupational definition is there, but not to compartmentalize science, technology, engineering, math into a narrow occupational preparation area.
Exactly, yeah. And do you see some states going in that direction, some colleges that have gotten on the STEM bandwagon and kind of dropped some other programs as a result? Or?
Well, I mean, I think what happens is something becomes a hot topic, and this has been emphasized very broadly across the country for a number of years. We tend to swing over there because we perceive a deficiency, and then I think we swing back. I mean, I do think that there has been a tendency to say, well, let's focus on STEM, and let's make sure that's good, and haven't necessarily brought the other areas of occupational preparation along with that. But I think my belief is that what will happen is that we'll start to infiltrate all of the curriculum, particularly in the occupational preparation areas, as industry more and more tells you that no matter what my job title is, I need to understand math, I need to understand some basic scientific concepts and principles, and that will be the basis for my value to the industry and to myself. So I think that's got to balance itself out. I think there are risks sometimes that we get too focused over here. And some of that is driven by that's where the money, sometimes that's where funds are, where grants are, where, but I'm quite confident that will balance itself out.
Now, getting back to the industry certifications and certificates, what do you think the policy should be around these areas, both in terms of government and colleges and schools?
I mean, I have my opinion on this, of course. I'm not a public policy expert. I believe that, and this is consistent, I believe, with the Pathway to Prosperity report, is that we've got to be careful, I think, that our public policy and the funding behind that policy is too narrowly directed. In other words, the degree focus being where the money is, the others, we don't have money there. I think it would be the direction of public policy seems to me to to get rid of barriers to supporting students and individuals as they are on that pathway, whether it be through a degree effort, whether it be through some sort of credentialing, certificate, or certification program. So I think a more open public policy would serve the interest, I believe, of the country and the individuals who are on that pathway. But it's got to be a system, and I think that the Pathway to Prosperity report would be very clear about this. This doesn't mean that you track someone and capture them in a particular narrow pathway. This is a free choice. And that the pathways that we start to put together are ones that have permeability between making new decisions. Like I might decide I want to be let's say an automotive specialist, and that's going to be a very attractive career. And I attain credentialing that supports that. That doesn't mean in 4 or 5 years that I have a new perspective and a new set of interests and motivations that would encourage me to look at some other either broader or deeper educational effort. So I think that's why I don't want to track people. You want to create opportunities, but this leads to the question I think the report also makes, is it's getting so complex. The proliferation of knowledge and information and credentialing is becoming, is going to continue to grow dramatically. How does someone navigate those potential opportunities?
Now, as far as colleges go, what would you recommend colleges do in terms of one-year certificates or embracing industry certifications?
My perspective on that is that colleges, to some degree, it's how a college defines who they are. Are they a primarily developer and deliverer of curriculum? Are they a delivery system of learning? Or in some cases, particularly I see at the community college level, I could see them defining themselves as a portal for learning, to have a point of access within a community to the global knowledge and learning possibilities that are there. So it's a little, and if they define themselves in that way, then it leads to a different set of services and a different set of skill sets even for them in terms of delivering and providing that kind of information to individuals. The missing piece is a guidance strategy and model to help individuals navigate a very complex set of opportunities.
All right, which brings up the question of what would you recommend to parents and students if they're pursuing non-traditional degrees, associates and bachelors?
I mean, yeah.
As in industry certifications.
No, I do understand the question.
Yeah.
I was just trying to an answer to that question. As a famous retailer once said, that an informed consumer is your best customer. In other words, I think we all understand the mass distribution models of learning and content and credentialing that is, in my view, will continue to proliferate and grow dramatically because of the technological capability of doing that. The challenge will be breaking our social norms and our history. I mean, I became an engineer because my family thought that engineering, at that time, they wore white shirts and ties.
Right.
And if you weren't, you didn't. So I became an engineer. I had no knowledge of that. And I think and there were much fewer choices at that time in my life than students have today. That's an area that I think where government can play a role. If not, then the private sector will step in and create solutions to those kinds of things. Navigational tools and mechanisms, but also to assure the parent, and that requires some period of time, assure the parent that there's no best pathway. There are pathways that serve the interests of that student and serves their life goals. They got to let go sometimes of their own historical perspective on some of that.
Okay, well, now what about GSX? What's the future of GSX in regard to this topic?
Well, that's a good question because we, to a large extent, as you had indicated in your opening comment, that we're in the business of looking at the creation of skill standards, understanding work and job requirements, looking at optimizing workforce solutions to that. Two things that come out of that work. One is that you can't prepare someone just for the job of now, because particularly in an educational scheme, they're going to be working for 4 or 5 years. That knowledge and skill set may no longer be valid or useful. So I'm thinking about not only preparing someone for now, if that's their goal, but also to support them in the development of capabilities that will have value in the future. That's a very critical area, and a lot of reports have talked about that. The other area we're focusing on, so we call that strategic analysis as opposed to just focusing on current. The second area we're working on is looking at ways of coming up with what we call actually modular credentialing. Sometimes credentials are kind of this one, that one, as opposed to saying that there are multiple combinations of units and elements of a credential that could be packaged for particular purposes and outcomes. So that's an area that we're working on currently.
Okay, great. Well, Dave, I want to thank you for being on the show. Thank you very much.
Enjoyed being here.
Okay, great. My guest today was Dave Wilcox, former Deputy Director of the National Skills Standards Board and now President of Global Skills Exchange. He discussed the makeup of the new degree. For more information about this show and related internet links and other shows in this series, go to retn.org and look for degree or the new degree. Thank you for joining us.